Welcome to Oneness and Wellness. I'm here with Marsha Reddington Lawton and Lorraine Goldblum. We're talking about vortex healing. Welcome, ladies. And also, I want to say thank you to our guest who's here, Laura, who's been very helpful. So thank you. And we're talking about today in vortex healing about intimacy. And I think we have some things to learn, maybe some very different things to learn about intimacy.
Yeah, intimacy. Intimacy is a popular, it's a popular topic. You know, I always say, we joke about that if you want people to come to your event, offer a healing on money issues or intimacy issues. And people just, come on in. And I think part of that is just a misunderstanding of what that word means. But, what we're doing here is we're just exploring different issues and how issues keep us out of being present. So we've done all these different, we've talked about loss and anger and jealousy and heartbreak and all these kind of things. But I guess I wanted to take a little time to talk about intimacy itself, not just issues related to, but what is intimacy, because there is so much confusion about what it is, and what is the point in getting back there? What are we trying to do here? Because we think of intimacy, that word comes up, and immediately we think of, romantic relationships and physical connection and all of that. But really, that is just an expression of intimacy. And the best definition of that word that I've ever heard is Rick Weinman's, who is the founder of Vortex Healing. And he talks about intimacy just as divinity experiencing itself and meeting itself through form. All right? So it's like a very deep recognition and reconnection of that which was separate coming back together. And that's kind of what we're doing here.
Right. So that, when you think about relationships, it could be many different kinds of relationships.
Yes, and you can have a very intimate connection with someone without necessarily having a deep, personal backstory.
Right.
That moment on the street or that moment in the gym when you have a very sweet moment with someone because you recognize something in that moment.
You feel the connection.
You feel the connection. You look in that person's eyes and you're like, yes, I know exactly what this moment is, and you have that beautiful sharing that goes well beyond history or backstory or anything that's going on. That moment of presence, that's intimacy.
And that moment is that moment that will stand out all day.
That's right. That's right. So our work is to really come back to experiencing that intimacy that's always there. It's just that our issues get in the way of that experience, which is why we explore them and we bring healing to them. But intimacy, presence, is the foundation of all of it. And I wanted to sort of come back and talk about, what that really means and what that really looks like, because there's so much confusion and we've lost touch with what it is to be intimate. We have all this idea from, media today, and these ideas we have of who we want ourselves to be and the ideal relationship. We've forgotten what it means to have those precious moments of pure presence.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, that intimate. Yeah, I'm reading a book, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Tender as the Night, and he does such a job on talking about intimacy. He's not using that word, but how he brings people and into a close situation. He gives you all the details of it. It's really very interesting.
Because when you're, something's intimate, it touches you in a very tender spot. Something that was closed off opens, and it's touched, and it's met, and it's seen, and it's held.
What that makes me think of is my youngest grandson was an infant, and in my arms in the chair, eye contact like you wouldn't believe.
Right.
And I'm deeply moved, and I'm looking around the room, and he's still looking at me in the same way, and something else gets my attention, and he's still looking at me. I'm thinking, he is so much more present than I, and look at what I'm missing. So we just went into eye contact. And it was the most beautiful, extended period of time of grace. It was just beautiful.
And he was an infant.
An infant, absolutely. Heaven through those eyes.
Yeah. And then we start to grow up and we have experience and issues and all of that, and it keeps us out of that. We're so in the story of mind, you know, how much nicer you could have had this beautiful picture of what it would be like to hold him, but then there's a difference between actually being there in the moment as he's being held. You know, we get confused, don't we?
We definitely get confused. I mean, television does a good job with that.
Yeah.
And, you know, all of that feelings about intimacy, it gives you sometimes a very wrong message.
Sure.
You know?
Sure. And intimacy requires vulnerability.
Right.
You know, and that's the hard part. You know, we've talked about in the context of self-worth and a lot of other issues, the importance of being vulnerable. You can't have intimacy without being open to it.
Exactly. Yeah.
You can't expect that deep connection if you
No,
don't allow yourself to be open. And how often, you know, we were talking about this in terms of loneliness, how we have this need to connect, and yet at the same time we're still hiding the parts that we're ashamed of. And so we want to be seen on some level, but we're still hiding. How can we have intimacy when we're giving mixed signals to ourselves as well as the rest of the world? It's incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
It's incredibly
very
difficult.
interesting. So, and of course, Vortex Healing deals with that issue of intimacy.
Well, you know, intimacy so much isn't an issue. It's the issues that get in the way of the intimacy. So when we work on our things, our issues, like the way self-protection is a great issue, and often the issue I have foundational students, as soon as they can use their tools, that's a great issue to explore. What are all the different ways that we shut ourselves down? Just at this class at the Omega Institute, we did a segment on loss, and I had a woman in class. She was lovely, an older woman, and during the loss segment, she was like, well, you know, I don't really, loss isn't an issue for me. And she had known loss, but she was saying loss isn't an issue and my loved ones are right there and it's just not something I experience. And you say, well, good for you. You know, what do you say?
Right.
And then when we did self-protection, the next day we did the issue of, she came up to me privately and she said, okay, I get it. She said she was able to see in working on that issue with Vortex Healing that she could see the ways that she had shut herself down from experiencing that pain of loss, that she would never allow herself to be open to love the way that she loved her grandmother.
Oh.
And she saw that and she allowed herself to feel that, which opened the door to everything else. And that's a very intimate moment when she allowed herself to experience that. And she didn't see it from any of the other angles.
What a gift she gave to herself.
Right.
Absolutely. And I'm honored that she was willing to share that
that with
because
you.
that's how things work. You know, and that's why we take a look at things from different points of view, because going at it from the loss angle or the anger, it may not work or resonate. But when we take a look at where are we shutting ourselves down from intimacy, we realize.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's interesting. So, I mean, so male, female, are there differences in how we transform or how we look at intimacy?
Oh, I'm sure there are. I think there are differences, men, women, grown-ups, children, how we express what we're looking for. You know, the ways that we're looking to connect. You know, we talk about how we identify with ourselves in different ways. I'm a very mental being myself, so I'm looking to connect to someone on a mental level. I feel seen and heard in an intimate relationship with someone who sees me, whereas on another level that's not so important, whereas another person might be more emotional by nature. They speak a different language, don't they?
Right.
They want to be, they're identified more on an emotional level, so they look for someone who has that same language, you know, so I think we all have our different identifications and what we're looking for and how we want to be met. And I think it's important to take a look at yourself and what you want and what you're looking for, as well as where you shut down.
Exactly. Really interesting. As you're talking, I'm thinking about, and I'm thinking about my husband, our relationship, which has been grown over the years, so that a lot of times we're synchronistic about so many things, or something he'll call me just at the time I'm going to call him, or, he's thinking about the same things we're thinking about. It's very interesting, that whether that's time spent with a person, that your intimacy grows, you're more present with that person.
Well, trust grows, doesn't
Right.
it? And over the years you realize time and again, this person proves themselves, and you're like, okay, and little by little guards come down, and it's a lifelong experience, I think.
Right,
And
I think
then
you're right.
suddenly you look across at this beautiful person, and you can just be yourself and
Right.
appreciate themselves,
Right.
and what a gift.
It is
that
a gift. It is a gift. And, and then, like, I've known some people for years and years and years, and I would never say that our relationship is intimate, because it's always talk, a lot of
Right.
talk,
Yeah.
and never anything,
Right.
that's has more depth.
Right. Shared experiences may be intimate, but they don't have to be.
Right.
It depends on the openness when you're sharing that experience.
Right.
Two people go horseback riding together, or play golf together, or that could be very intimate. Doesn't have to be. Just because you're doing the same thing in the same place doesn't mean you're really sharing. So it really
Exactly.
depends on the people and the willingness and the trust and what people are looking for from
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I think trust is a really big issue too.
Yeah.
And then
You can't talk about vulnerability without talking about
Trust.
trust.
Yeah.
And that's where the rubber hits the road, isn't
Right.
it? Yeah.
And being vulnerable,
Yeah.
is really so important.
Yeah.
And how do you learn to be vulnerable?
Well, I think it comes from a willingness, a wanting to see, and a willingness to be seen.
Which is the only place where change can take place, correct?
That's correct. Well said. Yeah, yeah. And I think the danger in relationships is that we fall into habits and we stop seeing each other. And not just in romantic relationships, but you've known someone for quite some time. Oh, that's Dot, that's the way she is. I know if I offer this to her, she's going to be into it or not. And we stop actually looking at the person in front of us and see sort of that imprinting buildup that's been in between. And we don't look at the person as they are now.
Exactly.
And that's a way of not being present. We sort of just fall into those habits and we stop seeing each other. And then, you wake up next to someone 20 years later, you don't even know me. Maybe they don't, because maybe they've been looking at that habit, how you were 20 years ago, and have stopped seeing you, and vice versa.
Right.
So a willingness to stop and say, hey, what is this now in this moment? That's a willingness to see and a vulnerability to be seen, if you can bring that to the table.
Sounds great. So we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. Viewing audience, we'll be back. We want to get more information about intimacy. And I think just what you've said already has sparked something in me to understand more about the issue. Thank you. Stay with us. For more information, check out our website, www.onenessandwellness.com. Thank you. Look forward to hearing us and watch our show. Welcome back to Oneness and Wellness. I'm here with our guests, Marsha Reddington Lawton, Lorraine Goldblum. We're talking about vortex healing, and we're talking about intimacy. So let's continue with the program, because it's very interesting. I feel like I'm learning things that I didn't know before. So this is great. So let's go.
Well, you were just offering something. We were talking about
Yeah.
sort of the idea of what intimacy is, and what was the language? The version, the idea we
Right.
have of what intimacy should look like.
And part of what we were talking about is ultimately when we have those intimate moments, this is the richness that we're looking for.
Right.
That gives our life so much meaning, and that because you have to be vulnerable,
Right.
because you got patterns, because you've got issues, because so much gets in the way. But it's actually who we are naked, and I don't mean sexually, physically.
Right.
I'm talking about without the issues, that we have the richness that gives so much meaning to our lives.
Yeah.
I'm so glad we're talking about this issue.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah,
It
that's
takes
it.
a kind of commitment, doesn't it? A
It
commitment to
certainly does.
yourself and a commitment to your partner and a commitment to the world to keep reevaluating that. You know, and not, as we were talking about before, fall into the habit of how you used. You know, when you meet someone, that relationship gets established pretty quickly, you know, in terms of the dynamic. You know, people fall into their dynamics pretty quickly, and we kind of ride on that as a given, and we stop seeing each other. So it takes a kind of commitment for someone you care about to say, okay, but how are they now? You know, how are they now? When we talk about presence in vortex healing, there's a beautiful class called presence. It is it's an energy that can be channeled. It's a healing tool called presence, but it's also an opportunity to sort of speak about what it means to be present. And the aspects to it, if you sort of look at what makes up presence and you define what's presence, you know, there's a freedom to presence. There are like three aspects. There's a freedom to it. But freedom is always relative, isn't it? Because you're free from something, like your issues or your conditionings, or you're free to something, like to be a certain way or to do something. But there's sort of a relative quality to freedom. But there's more to presence, because that needs to be anchored through the heart in some way. There's a beingness there. It's not just freedom out there somewhere. It's a freedom here, right? It's a freedom in form. There's a livingness to it. It's freedom here. But the thing that makes presence really presence is the now. There's a nowness to presence. So it's freedom here now. You know, so that I can be with you without my stuff imposing on it. Doesn't mean I don't have issues, but it means that they're not about me in this moment, that I can sort of bring myself in totality here with you now to experience what's going on.
Yeah, and you know, Lorraine, I think about, you know, an intimate conversation. If you're having an intimate conversation with someone, you don't want the interruption of a television or something else that takes you away. You want to be present.
Right.
You want to be able to listen to that person, to take it in and maybe respond in some way, so you realize that this is an intimate conversation.
Right.
And it takes listening, it takes presence, it takes paying attention to this person.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to shut everything else out to have that.
Sometimes, but you know, I think there can be a misconception about it as well, is that, you know, you have to put everything out. It's kind of just relaxing and inviting it all in. For example, another intimate moment with my husband could be sitting on the couch with him, holding his hand while we're watching the Nature Channel. You know, that's also very intimate, because it's a different kind of intimacy, absolutely. But, you know, just the texture of his hand, the way that he laughs when he sees something, you know, that's also a sharing. So we don't have to put all of our stuff, we don't have to shut everything out. We just have to recognize it's not about us and allow that moment to be free-flowing.
Right. Well, that is an intimate. That's a description of an intimate moment.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I guess I was thinking about conversations, because sometimes it's like all over the place. Say that there's a group of, it's not intimate. It's just chatter.
Right.
You know, so to have that intimate conversation, that's what I was referring to.
Sure.
You can't, you know, there has to be some presence.
There has to be some presence for an intimate conversation, be it about your deepest, darkest issue, or be it about the rerun of Downton Abbey.
Right.
You had that can be,
It
you
can
know,
be whatever.
Whatever is, you know, that tenderness that's revealed.
Exactly.
You know, that you allow yourself to be vulnerable in the moment can be shared.
Exactly.
You know, and you have to. There has to be a willingness to show up. You know, and just coming back to how intimacy is perceived in the world and what we're going for, these ideas that we see, this idea of the perfect relationship, and you know, these ads you see, oh, you know, 3 words that will, you know, drive that man away, or you know, all that, all these games we play with ourselves and with each other to get the ideal relationship. They're just games. There's just another way of managing human interaction to try to get what we think that we want, where it really just comes down to a willingness to be present and vulnerable and to be seen. And it's what we crave, and it's what we all resist.
Present, vulnerable,
Yeah,
and to be seen.
yeah.
Those are pretty good points for all of us in our
Yeah.
audience to
Yeah.
pick
And
up
willingness to see.
Yes.
and willingness to see.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, presence responds well to presence. You know, if someone's in a thing and you let them know that I see you and I hear you, you know, especially if you can bring to the table not wanting to fix them, even though that's a natural instinct when someone's in pain. But you can, if I see you, I'm here, that can diffuse pretty quickly.
Right.
You know, and that person can feel safer in expressing their pain or their anger or whatever it is, because you're bringing, you know, that presence, that intimacy to the table.
Right.
And that's where magic happens. That's where transformation can happen,
Right.
is that willingness to see and be seen.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
The willingness to see, to be seen.
Which
To
is
see and be seen.
Yeah.
a very vulnerable state, which once again is where transformation takes place.
Right.
I mean, if we're rigid or all fixed, there's nothing new.
Yeah.
Right. That's why the issues, they're connected.
Right.
That's it.
They're all connected.
They are connected. They're completely connected because that's how we experience ourselves, you know, through these identities that get created. And so we do our work, we do our vortex healing work or whatever work we do to be able to create space in that so that we can be present and have an intimate experience with life.
Exactly.
With relationships,
To be
with life,
alive.
to be
That's
alive.
right.
And with all of our stuff in our way, we talked about how anxiety keeps us in a very small place, and loneliness keeps us in isolation, and loss. I mean, all of these things, you know, and this is why we do the work. We bring love to it, we bring our healing to it. We get that stuff out of the way so we can experience what's already there.
Exactly.
We don't have to go somewhere to find intimacy. We have to be calm enough and still
Right.
enough to realize that it arises when we're present.
Exactly.
And that's the beauty of it.
I don't know if you know the song "The Rose," but so beautiful. I was just listening to it the other day, and the words are so, you know, meaningful. You know,
Yeah.
and I don't know. I listened to the song.
It's a beautiful song because she's talking about pain. Some say love is
Right.
this, some say love is that, but love is a flower.
Right.
You know, and so she's talking about how in the midst of pain and a harsh world, a flower blooms.
Exactly.
And so it's already there. And so it's a beautiful metaphor for what we're talking about, because pain is always going to be there. So long as we're informed and we have bodies and we love,
Right.
there will be pain. But in the center of that, can we keep our heart open? Can we be vulnerable? And can we have a willingness to be intimate with life?
Exactly.
You know, and that's why we do this.
Thank you. I want you to give our viewing audience a way to contact you.
Yes, thank you. So you can see these episodes as well as other things on my website, LorraineGoldbloom.com, where you can find out about vortex healing classes anywhere near you, or vortexhealing.org, as vortex healing is taught internationally.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for all that you're doing to help people to come to a new place, transformation.
Thank you.
Thank you.